Hello everyone, I'm Kazuyoshi Suzuki, Honorary Research Fellow of the National Museum of Nature and Science. Today, I'd like to talk to you about Japan's craftsmanship and manufacturing from the past to the present. In other words, Japan's climate, Japan's nature, its history, culture, customs, and national characteristics, and how they are all linked together. Since the Meiji Restoration in 1968, Japan has modernized faster than any other country in Asia. In terms of the reasons for this, the government and people have both successfully promoted industry, and as well as the educational system, including the Imperial College of Engineering. The people are said to be cooperative and industrious. However, everyone can imagine that it's not simple as that. I think that the reason for this modernization of Japan is to do with the climate and natural features. That is to say, nature, history, and culture. I think that climate is extremely important in the development of craftsmanship. For example, look at this photo. This is the view at dawn of Mount Tsukuba from my window. 1,000 years ago, a lady called Sei Shonagon wrote a poem called The Pillow Book. In spring, the dawn, when the slowly paling mountain rim is tinged with red, and wisps of faintly crimson-purple cloud float in the sky. This was her impression 1,000 years ago, and I can still enjoy that view today. And I think that's a very rare thing. Since the Middle Ages, globally, especially since the Industrial Revolution, other developed nations have seen a major decline in their forestry rate. I think it's currently about 30% in the West. Recently, because of the planetary environment and SDGs, Japan has for the past 1,000 years coexisted with nature, protected it, reared it, and now 70% of the Japan's land is forest. So we are able to see the same view as Sei Shonagon did 1,000 years ago. This culture and history, this climate has been accumulated and passed down from generation to generation, allowing the planting and breeding of trees, which is now one of Japan's strengths. Japan is blessed with nature and has looked after its nature. And this climate has meant, obviously, that Japan's industry and manufacturing has been impacted greatly by nature. Japan has its own unique steelmaking technology, and this is because Japan can use iron sand from its many volcanoes, as well as water resources and trees, which it is abundantly blessed with. Tatara steelmaking was developed in the Edo period in Japan independently and is the only method in the world where direct steelmaking technology can make steel at once from ore. It is preserved as a traditional technique now and is used to produce the blades in Japanese knives. Using iron, which has a different amount of carbon as the base material, the method of forging and hardening the sword together also evolved in a uniquely Japanese way. This Japanese sword has unparalleled sharpness and suppleness, as well as the beauty of the blade crest and warp that beautifully expresses the spirituality of the Japanese people. However, Japan was a peaceful place in the Edo period, and so rather than swords, spades and hoes, pans and kettles and nails were the mainstay of the steel production. And for this need, the steel making, the amount made, totaled 15,000 tons per year. In the Edo period, the population was 30 million, which means that one person could use 5 kilograms a year. And in Japan today, after China and India, Japan is third place, producing 100 million tons of steel. This means that in the Edo period, people could only use a very small amount of steel, and they had to use it very thoroughly and reuse it as well. This culture of not wasting and using implements very carefully and sparingly has been extended to things other than iron and steel, and in a self-sufficient lifestyle, the balance of supply and demand is extremely important in Japanese manufacturing today. Let's speak a bit more about craftsmanship nurtured by climate. Civilization comes from the word city or conurbation, and it means people and society are modernizing and have universal values and lifestyles and approaches to their craftsmanship. This means that one country ends up with one sense of value. However, culture means to cultivate. And I won't go into the details here, but it is something like similar to agriculture with an inherent sense of value unique to that area. Put simply, there is civilization, which is the material outcome of the scientific and machinery development, and also the spiritual outcome of civilization, which comes from the individual societies and lifestyles. Natural features are the nucleus of culture, and I think that culture and civilization are inseparable. They are not antagonistic, they go together as global and local do. And only when we have both of them can a country really develop its craftsmanship. So more specifically, what you can see here is the 634-meter high sky tree in Tokyo. And something such as this high building in a country with many earthquakes like Japan, it's very difficult to construct because there's not much land in Japan. We need high-rise buildings. Therefore, as you can see here, flexible construction techniques were used to withstand earthquakes, with an outer steel structure driven into the ground and a central reinforced concrete cylinder, the core column, suspended at the top to control seismic shaking. This soft construction is the same as the willow trees which are used to withstand the shaking caused by the wind. And in Japan, this has been used since ancient times as a central plank of construction. 1,300 years ago, the Horyuji 5-storied pagoda was built. And in areas around Japan, we see other 5-storied pagodas built in a similar fashion, which are able to survive almost without collapsing due to the wooden structure that absorbs the shaking of earthquakes by using multiple timbers called tokyo, or heart pillar structures, and not by using nails to hold the building firmly in place. This temple architecture technology that came to Japan from China is very necessary and has contributed to the development of technology. China and in the West, which have few earthquakes and disasters, have many buildings made from bricks and stones, more sort of hard construction. However, in Japan, this wooden, soft construction was the only course available to architects, which meant that in other countries without many earthquakes, such construction methods were not necessary. However, in today's world, where buildings over 1,000 meters need to be built, this soft construction method is absolutely indispensable. As for Japan's Shinkansen bullet train, which is the envy of the world, we can also see some of this technology and climate in action. Some people say that the front of it looks like a kingfisher. This is because Japanese railways have many tunnels to go through, and when the bullet train goes through at high speed, it could cause shock waves. So this shape is to avoid that from happening. It's necessary in a country such as Japan, which is very mountainous, but in other countries with not so many tunnels, this would be seen as over-quality. Unlike universal science, technology cannot be just used the same globally, as there are various local restrictions such as voltage, language, and other peculiarities that need to be adapted to the topography and climate of the country. So the characteristics of Japanese craftsmanship are, of course, buildings that are aligned to the climate, but there are other aspects, such as your technology being useful to society and people. So people to be pleased, the people using the technology, the idea is to make something that can be affordable, which is good quality and which anyone can buy. One example of this can be seen in the Edo period. Here we have some mechanical clocks made in the Edo period. Before mechanical clocks, these came from Europe to Japan. And before then, in Europe and China and Japan also, there was a time method called the varying time method based on the changing lengths of the noon and the evening. However, in Europe, because of the civilization and the urbanization, they moved to the fixed time method. This was in line with the invention of the mechanical clock. As with the Cinderella fairy tale, we can see that if you don't observe time correctly, you can be punished. So they this is a story of aligning people's lifestyles to machines. However, in China, rather than changing society and aligning to machines, they had clocks such as the Qing dynasty clock, which was really a plaything of the emperors. In Japan, they didn't change society, they didn't align to machines, they aligned machines to Japan. And that's the same today. And in the peaceful Edo period society as well, they wanted technology to be available to everyone in society. And Japanese craftsmanship provides examples of this. The Edo period was the 265 years from 1603 until the country reopened in 1868. During that period, each of the fiefdoms tried to make their areas flourish by, irrespective of your social status, exhorting hard work and diligence, and which caused good competition among industry. However, because of the existence of the shogunate, they were not able to absorb or take over each other, which meant that rather than number one in a particular field, they aimed to be only one, making something different to another clan. For the same product, there was a competition with other similar products with other clans. If the next door clan was making thin-skin manju buns, you would make tea-flavoured buns. Also, there was a strategy of isolation for the country, so hardly any supplies could come into Japan and it needed to be self-sufficient. And now the SDGs, which mean that humanity have to live sustainably upon the planet, and to do this to achieve these goals by the year 2030. We've only got one Earth and all the people have to live on it, which is a difficult challenge. However, in the Edo period in Japan, nothing was able to come in from the outside. And 265 years, the Japanese had to live on their own land only. Also, if we look at the modernization since the country reopened, the potential and the national power of the country has not been compromised at all. And because of the self-sufficiency, people are not able to replenish nature, which means they have to use it very carefully. Here you can see a rice ball that has been repaired with kintsugi, and at the time this was very normal practice. People were expected to make things last and to treat them with care. And as it was a peaceful period, the feudal lords in charge of each domain wanted to make their lands prosper and wanted to give their people education and knowledge. And so they advocated diligence and hard work. For example, Mito Mitsukuni, who was one of the Tokugawa family during the early Edo period, commissioned Hoan Horozumi, the domain's physician, to compile the Kyumin Myoyaku, a book on herbal medicine, for the people. The preface states, "Poor territories cannot afford medicine. Those living in remote areas could not afford a doctor. Therefore, the sovereign ordered them to compile a list of medicinal plants that grew in the fields and mountains that could cure illness and injury along with the prescriptions, to compile this book and distribute it free of charge to the people of their fiefdoms." In this way, the feudal lords wanted to confer knowledge to the people to help them when they were sick. However, these were also written in Japanese. In the world of scholars such as Hoan Horozumi at the time, knowledge was the preserve of a limited number of people, and books tended to be written in Latin in the West, and in China and Japan in Chinese classical writing. However, to get knowledge to the average person, it had to be not this classical Chinese writing that only scholars could read, but they had to be written in Japanese. So the feudal lords ordered after that not just medicine, but many books to be published in Japanese. The Compendium of Materia Medica from China, for example, an excellent book on pharmaceutical matters, was translated by a man by Kaibara Ekiken. However, these were not merely just translations, but in order to be easy for people to use, the Compendium of Materia Medica included lots of drawings of plants taken from different mountains, as well as the names of different regions, how to use the plants, how to consume them. So all sorts of knowledge was provided to people in a way that was easy to use. It is said that Japanese education is a high level, but in fact, since the Edo period, the feudal lords made it an order that books useful to people were published in Japanese and that these were prevalent in society. Poor people were able to read them by going to the Terukoya temple elementary schools. Of course, the Terukoyas were basically free. And today in Japan as well, people are able to access cutting-edge scientific knowledge in Japanese. From Edo to today, the top Japanese scholars have continued to convey cutting-edge knowledge in Japanese. And you can tell from the number of Japanese Nobel Prize winners, but I've often heard from these Japanese Nobel laureates that it is because Japan is able to think and communicate in its own language outside the West, that is able to conduct science and technology with different ideas from those in the West, which is the center of science and technology. Let's have a look at the relationship between Japanese climate, culture, and craftsmanship. One of the great recent inventions is the electrothermic equipment, which is a universal global technology and invention. It came into Japan and was used for cooking, but in Japan most people tend to cook rice under their dietary culture. So the electric rice cooker, this unique cooking device, was invented. This electric thermic application cannot be called an imitation because it is linked to a unique Japanese food culture, and while it is an application of the technology, it can only be made in Japan. Now, rice cookers are used all over the world, and just like a pressure cooker, they can be used for stews and steamed foods, for breads and for cakes. So a global piece of electrothermic equipment became a local electronic rice cooker, and then in another country is used for a different food culture. This technology is used in a kind of catchball and is used to propel forward cultures and technologies, I believe. In a global world, we need the local. We make up for what we both lack, and within an area of competition, we propel forward craftsmanship. The photo below is the world's first desktop calculator with the MPU 4004 installed in it. It was developed by Japan Visicom Corp. In the 1960s onwards, when integrated circuit technology began to take off, calculators were being developed around the world. However, in the West, there was not much interest in making very small calculators like they are today, because in the West it was really just accountants and a small number of professions that used them, so they could be about the size of a desk. However, in Japan, there was the abacus, which everyone has used to learn maths at school, and if we could make calculators as small as abacuses, then lots of people would buy them. So Japan Visicom then took this large-scale CPU and made it into a microprocessor unit, and this was then developed by Intel, which resulted in the world's first 4004. And they succeeded in making calculators much smaller, and today we see these microprocessor units in everything from computers to smartphones, in all electrical equipment. And this is thanks to the culture of the abacus in Japan, which gave rise to this development. This photo is a liquid crystal display television. Now, black is being used not only for LCD TVs, but also for home appliances that used to be called white goods. And this started back in Korea, where in 2003, Japan was leading television design around the world, and a Japanese designer formerly from Toshiba was developing a similar LCD TV at the same time. However, if a face appeared on a black frame television set, it would be a portrait of the deceased in Japan, which was bad luck, and not at all well received. However, this black TV is called piano black, and piano black is an imitation of Japan black. Japan's lacquerware, called Japan in English, started to be exported during the Edo period from Japan to Europe, where it was very popular. This jet black luster was very popular even with Princess Marie Antoinette of France. This piano black, as with the porcelain from China, was the envy of the West and was imitated. Korea took the lacquerware that Japan once used to satisfy Western tastes and applied it to LCD TVs. It is a shame that Japan could not take advantage of their own history. In Japan in the 21st century, as with LCD TVs, there are other instances such as with mobile phones, whereas despite having the highest level of technology in the world, the Galapagos syndrome is occurring. Due to this extremely intense domestic competition, however, we see many innovations such as cameras on smartphones. And in the Edo period, we talked about uniqueness as a characteristic of craftsmanship. And indeed, with mobile phones with cameras, many Japanese companies are competing in Japanese society to make something unique, which results in products that everybody loves. So from the contemporary to the modern, in Japan, as with these mass-market products, such as automobiles and home appliances, it is not usually the case that one company dominates, but usually companies with a similar line of business make slightly different products that are then refined. It may be seen as a kind of Galapagos syndrome around the world, but I think that actually it shows the continuity of Japanese society, its climate and its civilization into the current age. This approach of competing but coexisting at the same time when it comes to manufacturing has probably faded a bit. However, there is a major impact of Japanese companies in manufacturing working for the benefit of people, for the environment and for society, and not just for profit and for getting bigger in scale. In the 18th century, in Europe, the word civil engineering was born. It means the techniques of the citizens and refers to civil engineering. But in the West at the time, the techniques that could be used by the people were mainly for building bridges and roads. However, in Japan, which didn't have war and was a peaceful nation, they were more used for hoes and spades and tools, meaning that many people could have tools to make their daily lives prosperous. All techniques and technologies are civil engineering, and the technicians are highly respected. This was the same was true after the Meiji period, where talented people became engineers and devoted themselves to the development of Japan. If we look at the automobile industry from this only one perspective, at the moment there are 8 companies producing automobiles in Japan. Around the world, having 8 top automobile manufacturers in one country is Japan only. And these manufacturers, as you can see here, Toyota has the hybrid Prius, also the Japan's first K car, the Subaru 360, or Mazda's pioneering rotary engine, or Honda's world first emission-compliant Civic. Each of these companies have these only one technologies, and these are really due to Japanese culture. Not a number one society, but to become the next number one, we have to get rid of the previous number one. So in an only one society, each company can coexist while competing with each other, valuing customers and their patronage with their respective technologies. As we aim for the SDGs, there is a lot that we can learn from this only one society that has continued since the Edo period. As I have described, the Edo period was a peaceful one. People were without war for 260 years and lived a peaceful existence. The samurais and the peasants had a lot more amusement and play than we can imagine. That normal people could enjoy so much entertainment, I think there was nowhere else in the world at the time. In the Edo period Japan, there was none of the steam engine and mechanization of the West, or factories with these technologies. However, as with the world of the ukiyo-e paintings, there was a lot of craft, performance and amusement, and ukiyo-e as well. They were like today's portraits of stars and photographs of famous landmarks, which stirred people's popularity and yearning to travel. The famous Sharaku head painting here is quite deformed, and like Doraemon in today's cartoons, it's probably more to suit people's attention and tastes rather than to be artistic. Popular fads and entertainment have created other fads, which is a characteristic of Japanese society that lead to today's manga, anime, and Harajuku fashion. The same could be said of origami, which has been played with Japan since ancient times. It's very popular internationally, but for Japanese people it's so obvious that they may not realize. But you can imagine a 3D shape and make it with one sheet of paper. You can imagine in your head and then create with your fingers. Mathematicians use numbers to plot 3D objects. However, Japanese, instead of using numbers, are able to use one piece of paper and convert their imagination into something that they make with their hands. When we are children, we learn how to do geometry with our hands for fun. And then when we become adults, at the factory, we use schematic diagrams to imagine the form of a product. The Miura map fold is an origami technique that is used on the solar panels of satellites and is used around the world today. Japanese culture created origami, and these technologies came from this. Once upon a time in Japan, a factory introduced industrial robots, and the person in charge put photographs of idols on them and then called them by those names. It shows this climate of acceptance towards robots and familiarity with robots in Japan. In Japan, we have robots like Mighty Atom, Asimo from Honda and Sony's Aibo. But in the West, due to religious reasons, there was some misgivings about giving a biological image to robots as if they were humans or animals. So robots that communicate like Atom or Aibo were the preserve of Japan only. And I think this starts with the mechanical karakuri dolls in the Edo period. In the West as well, there were many talented developers who were making automated dolls. However, most of these were only for the enjoyment of the aristocracy or the upper classes, whereas in Japan, karakuri dolls were made not only for the nobility and feudal lords, but also for the general public to enjoy as products of popular entertainment, such as karakuri plays, tea-carrying dolls, as well as float karakuri. And the Yumibiki Doji is a karakuri doll with 12 moving parts that are powered by a spring and moved by 6 cams and a string puller. It's a simple construction, but Doji aims 4 arrows from the arrow stand to the bow one after another, aiming and shooting at the target. He can even fire them 10 or so meters away, which is very surprising, but this actual karakuri doll comes from unique Japanese thought. Sometimes the arrows don't fly as planned. And, if this was shown to the aristocracy, it would lead to a failure and a kind of disgrace for the inventor. However, it was for the common people, karakuri, for the public, and these should be entertaining without boring the audience. Failure was an important part of the performance. And also the facial expressions could show a sense of shame at failure or a sense of happiness at being successful. And the communication between human and machine is something that was brought together by the craftsmanship of Japanese culture. That's all for my talk today. There were other things I would have liked to have talked about, but I would like to end with some words from my old teacher. He said that industry and climate are inseparable. The climate of each country, in other words, the soil, is the source of industry by levelling and preparing the soil. If there isn't any electricity, then we can't build factories. So we have to start with building power stations. We can have no cars if there are no roads for them to run on. So let's build roads and bridges for the cars. To take craftsmanship further, each country, climate, culture, and history must be understood, and the global and local successfully intertwined. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much for your attendance today. We have provided a URL in the YouTube summary section, and we would appreciate your cooperation in answering our survey. The deadline for responses is November 26, 2022. JASO will continue to organize various events at TIEC as a base for international exchange. We very much look forward to seeing you at our events at TIEC in future. The 55th TIEC Cross-Cultural Seminar will be held on Saturday, December 10th, 2022. Please check the JASO website for more details.